This enclosure full of monkeys, and in the middle of the enclosure there's a ladder, and at the top of the ladder there are a load of delicious bananas. So naturally, every day the monkeys go up, eat the bananas, have a great time. But then the experimenters do this thing where they set a trap on the ladder. So if any monkey goes near the ladder, it activates cold showers all across the enclosure. And so all the monkeys hate this, and they start attacking any monkey that goes anywhere near to the ladder. And so the monkeys eventually learn no one goes near the ladder, right? And then what the experimenters do is they start replacing the monkeys. And the new monkeys come in and they try to go near the ladder, but they're attacked and they're taught, don't go near the ladder. And all the monkeys learn, you never go near to this ladder, right? And slowly the experimenters replace all the monkeys until all the monkeys that are left over have never experienced a cold shower. They have no idea why they shouldn't go near the ladder, and yet none of them do. And then they turn the ladder off. I mean, they turn the trap off, so there's no cold showers. But still, none of the monkeys go near the ladder. And the reason I'm telling you this is because it says a lot about human behavior as well. Like, one of the reasons we have so many problems in the world is because we have so many ingrained beliefs, and we really think that the system that we're living in is the right system. But we really have to believe, we really have to understand that the system we're living in is so primitive. There's an amazing, completely by-the-day, up-to-date graph of CO2 emissions, and you can see that it's still accelerating. Even if we were to stop all fossil fuel developments tomorrow, all new developments, it would take 10 years before we even saw a downturn in CO2 emissions. So the political system, the way it's dealing with this, is just no way near enough. Tomorrow we're going to be building a big forest. It's going to be a nice legal action. We're not going to do anything illegal. But if you want to come along and help to build the forest, it'll be right in the middle near Parliament Square around midday. Come along. We'll get a load of trees, and we'll show the government that 11 million trees, their promise, is completely inadequate. 11 million trees is enough to absorb the last hour of global emissions? That's it. Anyway, I didn't really tell you much about myself, but I probably spoke for 3 minutes. I'll hand over.
Matthew, thank you very much indeed. Now, before we take our first question, and if you have any questions relating, this by the way, for new joiners, this is the Climate and Ecological Emergency Question Time Hour. Please come and step forward with your questions. But before that, could we really raise our voices for the lock-ons who are here around the Lorry of Hope? And just to say that we welcome questions from you who are locked on, as well as the police constables. I'm sure. But anyway, first question, please, for your question time panel. Anything to do with the climate and ecological emergency? Well, whilst we are waiting for someone to valiantly step forward, we have a question. Forward, sir.
Would you agree that the European beaver is the ultimate animal climate rebel?
Panel.
I think there are a lot of very important species in contributing to mitigating our climate crisis. So about 1/3 of our emissions are absorbed by natural ecosystems on land, things like forests and things like wetlands. And I'm not sure quite where you're coming from with your question, but of course beavers are amazing ecosystem engineers. What beavers do is they create wetlands, and wetlands absorb a huge amount of carbon. So beavers are fantastic. Beavers are critical for rewilding our landscapes. As for whether they are the ultimate climate rebels, I'm not sure, because there's one particular group of animals that is hugely important, and that's animals that eat fruit. So things like monkeys and other primates, birds like toucans and hornbills, and other things like this. And these animals that eat fruit are really, really important because they disperse seeds. Fruit is an invention that trees have come upon because they need to hire someone to disperse their seeds somewhere else. Plants need to disperse their seeds so they can germinate successfully, and so fruit-eating animals are hugely important for doing that. And they're particularly important because it turns out that the species of tree that have fruit tend to be much, much bigger than trees that are dispersed like the wind, like these plane trees here. So what we're seeing at the minute is not only are we losing lots of our forests through deforestation, but we're also losing the most important species within them because we're hunting out all the monkeys and the birds. What's happening now is that the biggest, most carbon-dense trees, which are sequester and store most of the carbon, they're not reproducing successfully because we've lost these animals. So just to sum up, beavers are hugely important, fruit-eating animals are hugely important, and I guess the message is our ecosystems that absorb carbon, they're not just trees. Animals are part of those ecosystems, and if we don't conserve animals, these ecosystems will decay, and not only will we lose the wonder and beauty of our biodiversity, but we'll also be undermining our own fight against climate change. I hope in some way that started to answer your question.
I just wanted to add to that, because I've been doing some research as well, actually supported by the amazing Charlie here, so none of this is stuff that I knew before, but I've just been looking stuff up, and I came across 3 things that I just wanted to express. So the first one is that a lot of you might have seen this, it's been doing the rounds, but it's now thought that bees are actually the most important creature on the whole planet because of their pollinating impacts, and they are at risk of going extinct, very severe risk. Is that the case? Yeah. Also, the other thing is what Charlie was saying about the big trees being so important at sequestering carbon. That's why it's so terrifying at the moment that so many big animals that are actually required to make sure that these trees stay happy and intact, such as forest elephants. They have a really important role as what's called forest gardeners, making sure that these big trees stay as they are and getting rid of kind of the bits in between. And they are also, according to a recent study, at risk of going extinct. And the third species I also just want to mention are creatures that usually play a very important role in maintaining our soils. Now, you might have heard that up to 50% of our topsoils have now been lost due to a mixture of climate change and human intervention and farming and agriculture and erosion. And actually the creatures that usually maintain our soils are worms, earthworms. And I'm sure again you've heard that a lot of species of earthworms are currently at risk of going extinct, and we've lost about 80% according to some studies of our earthworms. So we can't even mitigate against the damage that's going on our soils right now.
Just to say on soils, you probably all already know this, that the best way to protect soils is to not eat meat and to avoid animal products, because that's the main thing that's destroying all the soil. But for those you can't convince, try to convince them to start with beef and lamb, the two that consume the most land. It's amazing how much easier it is to convince people of that if they're completely refusing to give up meat in general. So I'd really, really encourage people to do that.
Can I just say something short and cheesy? I think the single most important species to save our future is here around us. It's climate rebels and ecological rebels, and it's hopefully the only species that is currently growing, or like the one that we want to grow. So keep going.
Thank you very much. And just to keep it flowing, if you would like to ask a question, could you please come and sit down here so we can channel the questions through? Any questions? Yes, there's one coming forward. Whilst we just wait for you, a short question with a very simple answer. Is a small temperature rise globally, is it such a big deal? Who would like to feel that? Emily?
Yeah, it really, really is for a variety of reasons. First of all, even just a tiny increase in our global temperatures has massive impacts on our weather systems. So, a little bit of basic physics: water evaporates off the oceans, turns into water vapor, it condenses to become clouds, it falls as rain. If the air is even just a tiny little bit warmer, more water evaporates off the oceans, you get more water vapor in the air, and consequently you get more rain. That's why we've been seeing extra flash floods across the world, even here in the UK, and huge storms and hurricanes. Those are also impacted by just tiny changes in temperature. In addition, that extra 1.1, as it is now, degree of warming means that the likelihood of heat waves across the world has massively increased. The heat waves that were across Europe in this year and the year before, studies have shown that they were made up to 100 times more likely because of climate change, because of this extra 1 degree of warming in the atmosphere. In addition, warming actually not only makes more water evaporate off the oceans, but it also makes the oceans themselves expand, get bigger, take up more space. This is contributing to rising sea levels. And of course, heat in the atmosphere also creates melting of the ice in the ice caps, which also contributes to rising sea levels. It's been estimated that if you add together all of the rates of melting over the last 40 years in the ice caps across the world, we're melting more than something about 200 double-decker buses worth of ice every second, just from this extra 1.1 degree of warming. So it really does, even though it seems like a tiny amount, it really is having a massive, massive impact across the world. And the thing is, it's having the biggest impact right now in countries far, far, far away from where we are here now. But not only is that a humanitarian disaster, but those countries are where we grow crops, it's where we grow our food. We import 50% of our food, 70% of our fruit and vegetables. And if the harvests fail in those countries, not only are those people massively impacted, but so will we be eventually. It's a huge crisis. The governor of the Bank of England has said that climate change is going to have huge impacts on our economy, and it is indeed a global disaster, just this 1.1 degree of temperature change.
Yeah, that's the thing. It can really run away, and you guys probably know this. Obviously, the ice normally reflects a lot of the heat of the sun, and as that disappears, the ocean underneath it is a lot darker, and that darker ocean is absorbing more heat, and so that creates a runaway effect. And also, a lot of this ice contains a load of.
So I'm just saying, we want to walk away with the albedo effect.
Okay, you want to know what it's called? The albedo effect is the effect of the Earth reflecting the sun's heat. So the Earth is normally relatively good at doing this. If the Earth had no atmosphere, then it would be significantly hotter during the day and significantly colder during the night, I think. Huh?
Minus 18
Oh, it'd be minus 18 without the atmosphere. Oh, minus 18 at night. Yeah, we'd wobble up and down quite a lot. But yeah, no, this wasn't the main. Oh, yeah, I just wanted to talk to you about runaway effects, like the methane in the ice as well, which is melting and being released, and that's a very, very potent greenhouse gas. All of these things are runaway effects. So the IPCC has basically said that they think we could get this effect of hothouse Earth, where we get these runaway warming effects and things get hotter and hotter and hotter without us being able to control or mitigate them, anywhere between like 1 degree and 2 degrees. And that's why we've set this kind of like 2 degree limit. Sorry, no, up to 3 degrees. Where did we set the top limit, the IPCC? For running? Oh no, we only set a lower limit, didn't we? Yeah. Yeah, 2 degrees is what we're aiming for, because we're worried that even at 1.5 we could get this effect of runaway warming. Anyway, sorry, the reason I'm slightly distracted is because what I really wanted to tell you about was why the weather is changing. Even though we've only had this tiny temperature increase, really, it seems really small, it's actually having this enormous effect. So the weather is oscillating really hugely, right? Does anyone know why that's happening? So we have this thing called a jet stream, which is this very fast stream of air that carries air just around the northern hemisphere. It happens in the southern hemisphere as well, but I'm just going to think about the jet stream hitting this country, carrying us consistent weather, which is why the UK has been known for being consistently kind of wet and drizzly for ages. Anyway, this has stopped happening. And the reason is this jet stream is driven by the difference in temperature between the equator and the poles. And as the world heats up, the poles are getting hotter faster. And so the difference in temperature between the equator and the poles is getting smaller. The poles are getting hotter, the equator's getting a little bit hotter, but then the difference between those two temperatures is now smaller. And because there's less of this temperature difference, this jet stream, which is driven by that temperature difference, is now slowing down. And if you think about what happens to a river when a river slows down, rather than running really straight, it runs in this meandering shape, right? It starts to go really slowly and starts to meander. And these meanders get locked in place, and now our jet stream is doing this instead. And so if I'm Great Britain, and the meander now goes over the top like this, then all this hot air gets sucked up from underneath, and we get incredible heat, far hotter than we should be getting for that time of year. And if the meander goes beneath me, then it sucks down cold air from above. And this is why we had this unbelievably hot July, because we were underneath the meander, and then a very cold, rainy August, because we ended up above it. And even this relatively small temperature change is radically changing the weather, which is confusing loads of our species from animals to plants, which is causing all these knock-on effects. As Emily said, we're reliant on these crops coming from these other countries. I think we're something ridiculous, like 70% of the world's food relies on around like 9 or 10 crop species. It's more 15. It's around that number. And if these crop species start to fail, then we're all doomed, basically.
Hey!
Thank you, Matthew. Scary but true. So your question, please. And if other questioners would like to step forward.
So many of us have probably come to this movement from the environmental movement and our love of nature and understanding of those systems. But I think if we want to give greater understanding to a wider number of people, i.e. the majority of the public, I think it's important that we link our ecosystems and our love of nature, but actually most importantly with how impactful they are on our food production. So I'm just wondering if you can highlight some of those roles for people that might not know, but also maybe any kind of anything you've read that talks about, our future failed crop productions, etc., etc. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And just to add to that, even the UK harvest last year in certain crops was 30% less than the average. This isn't just an abstract thing happening elsewhere in the world. Who would like to start answering?
So I'm going to just talk about some real life stories about food impacts and climate change, and I think they'll talk about the science stuff, the real stuff. So two big global events that have happened recently have been directly related to climate change. Climate change has not been the only factor, but it's directly been related. One was the Arab Riots. Does anyone remember those? Before the Arab Spring, but also the Arab Spring was part of this, and the original Arab Riots, and this turned into a very bloody internal conflict. There was a few hundred people died, and it was really nasty, this internal conflict. This happened because of food price rises in Egypt that were a knock-on effect from droughts in China and droughts in Russia, and that's where they import their grain from. And these were unprecedented droughts linked to climate change. So this is just kind of understanding the global, how interlinked we are as a global system. And again, Syria, I'll talk about that briefly, and most people do know the linkage of climate change and Syria. Before the Syrian war, and I was in Syria at the beginning. I was living in Turkey at the time and travelled to Syria when it was just a beautiful and safe country with all these amazing, religious sites to see, one of the, the beds of most our major world religions, and just a beautiful place to visit. So I was literally travelling through and the revolution started then, and it was a very stable country. It was a very, very safe country. No one thought that the Arab Spring would take a hold there. But prior to that, there had been 4 years of drought, unprecedented drought. Adding to that a regime that was very oppressive, a dictator that took away lots of rights, people's ability to bore their own wells, and so on. So there's always lots of compacting kind of humour factors round about the government, round about the resilience on the ground. But 4 years of unprecedented drought saw mass migrations, 100,000 people to the cities. Then you had mass amounts of unemployment, mainly young men in the cities, unemployed, no living, no money to send back their families who were starting to starve in the countryside. And then the Arab Spring started, and they looked at that was just an opportunity to overthrow their government in very difficult times. And however many years later, it's 2011 that it started, there's one of the bloodiest conflicts in this century. So that's a direct link between not being able to grow food because of climate change and what the impacts that can happen. And because of the Syrian crisis, this has resulted in a divided Europe, essentially. So from a localized climatic situation, climate impact, a drought in Syria, Europe has seen the rise of fascism and securitized borders. So again, this can be the effects we can see.
Right. I think the way that I want to answer this question is in terms of risk. So if someone said to you, like you and I can flip a coin, and if it's heads, then you have to give me £100. Or we can flip the coin 5 times, and if it's heads 5 times, then, oh, this sounds so horrible saying this to you now, but like something really severe, like everyone in your family dies or something horrible like that. And likewise, if it was all tails and we got 5 tails in a row, then that happened to me. Then which game would we play? We'd play the first game, right? Even though it's actually really, really unlikely. What's 2 to the power 5? 4, 8, 16, 32, 64? Like 1 in 64? Actually, that's a pretty bad odds, isn't it? But still, like, it's very unlikely that you'd get 5 heads in a row or 5 tails in a row. This is one of the problems that's been going on with climate science, is that the scientists are conservative by nature. Like, you don't want to put out a paper and be like, oh yeah, this might happen. You want to say things that you're sure about, or that you're reasonably sure about. That's how science works. And the problem with that is that we're dealing with these enormous risks. And that's why we're starting to say that scientists all ought to release kind of risk assessments with their ideas, so that we can start to get a hold of how risky these things are, because it's very easy for people to ignore, because they're like, oh, you know, we could probably turn climate change around, whereas actually they're not really looking at the enormously horrible impacts that could occur if we don't manage to steer off course. So I was just going to go back to what Emily was saying about the bees, the pollinators. There are so many things, so many pressures that we've piled up on this one kind of animal, like different pesticides and neonics and stuff like that. These animals are now under enormous strain, and they might survive through it. They might manage to evolve quickly enough. I mean, we would think as scientists that they would probably really struggle with that, because we know that evolution happens on the scale of like tens, hundreds of thousands, millions of years. We know that it doesn't usually happen on the scale of decades, but they might manage to survive. But we need to start thinking in terms of risk, because these things are obviously incredibly risky, and I know that you guys really understand that, but I think that's one of the things we need to get better at communicating to the people who are saying, oh, this isn't really that big a problem. We need to get them to realise how big the risk is that we're taking.
I just wanted to add, the question was about animals, and 95% of the food that we rely on relies on the integrity of our soil. And as I said before, soil is really important, and in this way, and soil is maintained, the integrity of the soil is maintained by many small creatures such as worms and other insects. Insects, of course, are incredibly important, as you heard from Charlie, in terms of pollination, in terms of making sure that plants reproduce and survive, and that more grow, and those are the plants that we're relying on for food. We've also got the animals we talked about that are gardeners, not just the elephants, but also other primates and creatures that are helping to maintain the integrity of the forest and the other trees that are being used to grow our food. And I just wanted to also share that a study has shown that the risk of extreme weather hitting several major food-producing regions of the world at the same time could triple by 2040. Imagine what would happen if an extreme hurricane or a drought or a cyclone or a monsoon hit 3 different areas of the world that were all producing like huge quantities of our food all at the same time. We probably wouldn't be able to withstand that. And also that by 2050, land degradation and climate change together, because of course we mustn't sort of conflate the fact that climate change is one thing, but also we are specifically doing things directly to our land to damage it, not just through global warming and heating up the atmosphere and damaging it indirectly like that, but through a combination of climate change and land degradation. That's predicted to reduce crop yields by an average of 10% globally, and up to 50% in certain regions. Now, considering that our global population is continually doubling, how often? I don't know, but it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. We can barely feed the people we've got, and then we've got the risk of crop yields then going down by 50% in certain regions. So, this really is going to have an impact potentially on our food here, potentially very soon.
Thank you, Emily. Jefim.
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight that food security as well is one aspect where you really need to see how it's an interlinked issue, where again the economic and financial aspects are really important. So like the UN rapporteur or ex-UN rapporteur on food, Jean Ziegler, estimated that the current food system can nourish, I think, 11 billion, maybe it's 13. I was trying to look up the number, couldn't find it now. But anyways, much more than are on the planet now. And yet we see millions and millions of people starving every year, and yet we see even more millions undernourished and with serious disease from undernourishment. So we've got currently enough food, and still people are starving. So what that tells us is that was massive injustices going on, massive issues of distribution, and that means that a secure food supply for the future, yes, involves tackling the climate crisis because A, the population is still growing globally, and B, yes, the food production, the capacity to produce food is going to be massively impaired by climate impacts and soil degradation, as we heard. But it also means that we have to learn to share that food, right? We need to have fair systems of distribution in place. We need to stop speculation on food and all these things. So tackling the climate crisis is a step for food security, and also fighting inequality, fighting injustice is another step to securing future food security, and they are interlinked.
Thank you, Jefim. And Charlie has relayed a question from one of the XR activists who are locked on underneath what should be the pink lorry of hope. It's currently the blue lorry. That may be different by tomorrow morning. The question relates to the Gulf Stream, and that we are on the latitude of Labrador in Canada, which we think of as a cold and northern place. So I don't know if this is one for you, Marcus, but in terms of Matthew, I'm sorry, in terms of climate change, what can that mean for us, the changing of the Gulf Stream in terms of our climate and agricultural productivity? So, Jefim.
I can only say a little bit. I'm not going to say system interlinked now, I promise, but my background is actually in climate science. So it is true that the Gulf Stream is a major source of heat supply to basically Europe and the sort of Eurasian continent, which is why we've got a much milder and warmer weather here than at the same latitude in America, for example. And what we are seeing is the Gulf Stream, or the whole sort of North Atlantic heat pump, which it's called, slowing down, and it's projected to further slow down. And that means, basically less heat, also less humidity transported to Northern Europe, and that can interfere with processes as I think you were describing with the jet stream, so producing instability of the jet stream, and will produce all sorts of changes in weather patterns. That might mean changes in where it's raining, where it gets dry. Don't nail me down on the details, but basically it's just part of the global climate system and one component of the climate system that is changing, and that in turn will have further impacts on the weather systems that we see here.
And just to add to that, what everyone's been saying about the the differences in the jet stream being to do with the fact that we've got smaller sort of temperature differences now between the equator and the poles than we did before. Just to kind of ram that home, studies have now shown that actually we may be warming, which we are, but the Arctic is warming twice as much as we are. And that's obviously one of the most vulnerable and fragile parts of the world in terms of trying to conserve the ice, because of course that then will lead to the Albedo Effect, but also impact global sea levels. So as you heard, the Albedo Effect is the fact that if we lose the ice, we're not going to get as much sun reflected back out to space, we're going to get more sun being absorbed by the ocean, so it sets up these feedback loops. So people always say, well, you know, it can't really be warming, there can't really be a climate crisis, it's cold here, it's just as cold as usual, our winters are just as cold as usual. But as you've been hearing, that's not the point. Really make sure people realise that just because it doesn't seem so hot here, it's very hot in other parts of the world. And when you even that up over the globe, which is what we're looking at in terms of global climate, then it really does make an impact, and that is making a difference.
Can we get people inside the tent, or is that not okay? Does anyone want to get...
And your questions.
Hi. I've got a person in my village who describes climate change as a black and white issue, and is very much committed to taking measures to reduce emissions, and sees it very much as a numbers game of we'll reduce the emissions by this much and then there won't be a problem anymore. And I'm really worried that there is quite a wide opinion that it's just about reducing emissions and then all these problems will go away. And for me, it's a much more complex situation of climate change, ecological collapse, biodiversity loss, ocean warming, acidification, you know, so many different things that play in, and huge issues of inequality and humanity issues. So my question is, are you worried about climate change being taken as a kind of simplistic reductionist issue of we can reduce emissions in a way where decisions could be taken that reduce emissions but actually have more negative impacts on some of the other problems that we face? Does that make sense?
As a conservationist, I'm hugely concerned by that. You know, I'm interested in the loss of our functioning ecosystems and our biodiversity. We are here as Extinction Rebellion to rebel against inaction on our twin crises, but all the media here is that we're talking about the climate crisis. So this is a big concern to me because they have to be addressed synergistically. These two crises they simply cannot be addressed in isolation. To address your question more directly, you know, what your friend and people like them seem to think is that we can do what needs to be done by making small adjustments within the system that we still operate in. So we will continue playing the same game, but we will just play it a little bit nicer. And of course, that is not going to work. The system we live in is entirely built around the pursuit of economic growth and entirely built around the pursuit of profit by a tiny proportion of global capitalists. What we need, if we are going to survive, is to change the system from one predicated on economic growth towards a system that is based on survival. And yes, so that means we cannot, I simply don't think that capitalism can save us. I don't think a nicer, smilier version of capitalism can save us. I think we have to stop the pursuit of growth and we need to pursue survival.
Very much agree with Charlie here. I would say, though, that yes, the things are very much interlinked, but if they're handled correctly, so to say, like if we take the right measures to stop climate change, and I think the only measures to stop climate change, that is exactly the same things that will also reduce ecological pressure, that will also reduce biodiversity loss. So if we indeed tackle the issue of economic growth, if we tackle the issue of consumption, if we tackle the issue of how how much and how we extract resources. That's all the interlinked issues, and that will involve a system that is geared towards survival and towards justice is a system that looks different to capitalism, definitely. I will say, though, that I think the climate crisis or the climate emergency, which is like amidst all the crisis that you've mentioned, is one of the two things that are really, I think, are hitting sort of emergency state where time is really, really short. I think has helped to put these issues on the agenda, and I think people are understanding that there's something like systemic going on. There's something like that it's not just the climate, but it's the climate and all these other things that are happening. And like if I look at the student strikes, for example, which I find really, really hopeful and inspiring, I see so many students with signs saying system change, not climate change, and yelling that indeed. So I think people are getting it. I think the message is coming across, and I think also, as Naomi Klein put it, this, climate change is one of the symptoms of a fundamentally flawed and broken system, yes, but it can be also kind of the trigger, the sort of tipping point to change indeed everything, and hopefully get us to a system of survival and a better and fairer system.
Thank you, Jefim. We are coming to the final 5 minutes of this climate and ecological emergency question time. Shortly there is going to be a yoga session coming up, but a question from the top of the lorry. Right, I more or less heard that above or below the police helicopter, and this was to do with the extinction of the dinosaurs 65 million years ago, and temperatures then rose by 14 degrees, did I hear you say? So the question, to paraphrase and simplify, is that we were worried about a relatively small amount of warming now. Well, we're worried about two things. We're worried about ourselves and human civilization. We're worried about the loss of biodiversity. So from the point of view of the loss of life on Earth, in the past where there has been major climate change and species have survived that, they've been able to survive because they've been on an intact planet and they've been able to move. They've been able to and that's what species are doing now. They're shifting northwards towards the poles. They're shifting to higher altitude to stay within their niche as the planet warms. Biodiversity is hugely adaptable, it's hugely resilient, it's hugely robust. If we had not already destroyed 90% of natural ecosystems around the planet, I would not be worried about biodiversity. I would have faith that biodiversity would be able to adapt, would be able to rearrange itself around the world and survive. The problem is we have ripped apart the natural world. So, for example, we've destroyed most of our forests. We just keep tiny patches of forest in national parks and reserves. As the climate changes and those national parks and reserves stop being suitable for the species within them, those species have nowhere else to go because the parks are surrounded by industrial farmland. The point is that by destroying so much of our natural ecosystem, we have undermined biodiversity's innate ability to adapt to this crisis. So we're not giving them the room and the chance to adapt, and that's why that's my personal interpretation of why this is going to be so impactful.
Is it not also true as well, though, that that's of course hugely important, and also the fact that warming has never taken place so rapidly before? And I think that's, from what I've read, is like probably one of the most important things, is that yes, in the past it's been hotter, yes, in the past 3 million years ago, we had higher levels of carbon dioxide. I mean, we don't really want to go back to 3 million years ago, but yes, we have. Yes, it has been hotter. Yes, skeptics, you are right. It has been hotter. We've had more carbon dioxide, blah, blah, blah. But it hasn't ever risen this fast. And when it rises this fast, it means we can't adapt. We can't change in time for what's going on. And the reason it's risen this fast is not because of natural Earth cycles like it has done in the past. That's to do with the orbit around the sun, like every 20,000 years or something, our orbit slightly changes, so we have natural fluctuations in our carbon dioxide levels. Yes, that is true. And yes, it is true that we have volcanic eruptions and they lead to increases in the Earth's temperature. Yes, that is true. However, none of that ever has happened on the rapidity, that's the word, rapidity, the rate, the scale, the fastness, I'm losing my brain, to that it's going on right now. The levels of carbon dioxide have shot up in the last 150 years since the Industrial Revolution. They're shooting up at exponential rates, and they're still rising at exponential rates. That's super fast, and it means like the curve, if you look at them, it's literally going up like that, and it shows no sign of slowing down. So the temperatures are shooting up so fast, and I know 1.1 degree doesn't sound like much, but it's going up so fast that we could get up to 1.5 to 2 to 3 to 4 easily by the end of the century unless we do something right now. And it's that speed of increase that's going to do the damage, as well as the lack of integrity of the ecosystems around the world, which means that we can't adapt that way either.
Even that 4 degrees by the end of the century seems relatively optimistic. You know, that's kind of on track with policy if we actually apply policy, but the way we're going is looking like we could go up to 5 or even 6, like ridiculous levels. I was just going to add really quickly, the only time that we know of when we've had warming that we think was even close to comparable was longer ago than 65 million years ago. It was 252 million years ago, when there was an event called the Great Dying, in which 96% of all species that had existed on the planet previously disappeared forever. That's all I was going to say.
And I'll make that a little bit more gloomier, having some more facts around about that. Again, it is about the speed, and there's more parallels with this particular warming than with the Permian-Triassic warming 250 million years ago than it was the one you were talking about when the dinosaurs died off. And again, that's about the speed of it. So what we're seeing, the parallels that we're seeing, are particularly around about the oceans and the losing of oxygen in the oceans, because the life in the oceans cannot adapt quick enough with the heating up the temperature to keep the oxygen in the oceans and stop them acidifying. So this extinction event that happened, so climate change today is happening 10 to 20 times faster than natural climatic events. I don't know what that is in percentages, but thousands, I'm not sure. And looking at the Permian-Triassic extinction event, where we lost, I think it's 96-97% of life on this planet, that happened over 15,000 years. This is happening over a few hundred years, and that's the difference.
Thank you, Tessie. We are coming to a final question now from a woman, because not that we're competitive between different XR sites, but I was just hearing that all of the questions, all of the speakers over at Lambeth Bridge are men. So, Sue, step forward with your question, please.
Okay, thank you everybody for your questions so far and answers. I want to hear what each of you, if you had a magic wand, would ask the world to do, or the UK or Europe to do, as in what's going to make the biggest difference quick enough. Political, anything that you could just magically change. Please tell us.
And we can literally ask anything.
Got a magic wand?
Okay, I mean, we'd literally just stop burning fossil fuels tomorrow. It's that simple. Like that's by far the biggest slice of the pie. And you know, we talk about other things. I mentioned beef and lamb earlier. I've been running this campaign called No Beef to try and encourage people to drop that. I'm doing that because that's the single most significant thing that the individual can do. And it's empowering to help people to realise, you know, when they're very confused about what can I do about this, they're like, oh, okay, if I just drop beef and lamb, that's actually the most significant thing I can do. That's really empowering for individuals, but it's really small compared to just cutting out fossil fuels immediately.
Again, I would say about land use and then about food consumption. And I occasionally eat steak, and I'm going to be all right with that. And I do it once every few months, and I'm not saying you have to do this. And you know, it's not black and white. It's not demonizing other people. My boyfriend was a massive carnivore. He was like a proper man, bloke. I love meat. And then I went away on holiday for a bit, and he watched Cowspiracy, and he thought, oh shit, this is real. This is really real. And he still doesn't tell his mates up north that he doesn't eat meat, but he realizes it's really real and it's really scary. So I would say that about land. Secondly, let's bridge divides, because at the minute the environment is still seen as a left-wing thing, and it doesn't matter what politics you're on, it's going to get all of us. Your politics, what you believe in, is not going to, make you immune to food system collapse, to droughts, to heat waves that people can no longer survive in. So chill out, don't be aggressive, talk to your neighbour, talk to your friends down the pub, just talk to people and be human and be present and be like, yeah, this is real, this is all of us.
Very much agree. It's not going to be as popular as the phasing out fossil fuels right away. I mean, we have to phase them out really quickly. We can't do it tomorrow, because the other thing we need to take into account, and this is actually what I am doing my PhD about, is yes, we need to phase them out, but in a way that we still can meet our basic needs, right? And we also need to think of the basic needs of the people in the global south. So that means we need to reduce, so we can't rely on technological miracles or whatever, and renewable energies are going to be really important, but they're coming in slowly. We need to ramp them up quickly, but they're still slow. So we need to reduce where we can, but do it in a way without harming people. So if we just get rid of our fossil fuels tomorrow, I think we're in big trouble. We're running into winter, we need to heat our homes, some people need cars to drive to work and those things. But what we need to do is yes, we need to get rid of almost all cars, almost all flights, but in a way that we need to kind of find a way to facilitate for people to still get to work, to still do their shoppings and those kind of things. So we need to, and that's why we need to change the entire logic of the system, right? The system needs to be centered around meeting people's basic needs and not around the need to kind of consume more and more and produce more and more. So what I think is a massive, quick phasing out of cars, of flights, of all sorts of consumption, going down to a level that is needed to meet our needs and to meet them equitably, so we share them with all. But I think, and I agree very much with the speaker before me, the way that is going to happen is that we're going to build alliances with all these other struggles, because all these issues, as I said many times, are interlinked, and that's the fight against the climate crisis, the fight against the ecological crisis, the fight against capitalism, the fight against racism, the fight against fascism, the fight against sexism. All these things are systems of oppression, are systems that favor a privileged class and sometimes a small elite. And we need to kind of I think we need to build a movement of movements, create a mass movement that fights for emancipatory changes in all of these things.
Just to add something really quickly, because I know that my answer was obviously very idealistic, and brilliantly you've done a PhD in this, you know far more about it than me. But it would be in conjunction with far better battery technology as well, because this is one of the things, we talk about getting rid of cars and getting rid of flights. These things are going to be hard to do, whereas we can massively improve the way these things work by having much better networks of batteries, and that's one of the reasons why people are kind of pushing back a lot against green energy technologies, because they're they're not running all the time. So we need to have these fossil fuels constantly running in the background for when they're not running. So that's another thing I would do if I could wave a magic wand, is take a huge step forward in battery technology, because once we can store energy, we can start to generate it from much cleaner sources.
Just very quickly, I've been through about 7 different answers while I was waiting for others to speak. I'd like to make ecocide law. I think ecocide is stealing, it's theft from future generations. It is a crime against humanity because it undermines our survival. I would make it illegal and punishable to destroy our natural world in pursuit of profit.
So just as we draw to a close, could we have a show of hands? Is it useful doing these learn-ins? Yeah! Right. That's really good to know. Stay tuned, because at 5 o'clock we've got an aviation learn-in about why we need to be flying less and the impact of aircraft emissions. But first, please step forward, our panel, and if you could give them a very big hand. Emily Grossman, Jefim Vogel, Matthew Shribman, Charlie Gardner, Tessie Humble. And thank you all so much. I'm sorry we couldn't get around further questions. And more questions from our police constables later, please. But now, stay tuned with the XR Roadshow for yoga.
If you want to find out more about the science, please come and find us, Scientists for Extinction Rebellion. We're at the Future is Here site, which is on the Mall, at least I hope it should be. We've got a science tent, we've got lots of climate scientists going to be down there for as long as we remain there. So please come down, ask us your questions, or come and hear us speak. And if you want to follow our Facebook group to find out what we're up to, we're just called Scientists for XR or Scientists for Extinction Rebellion. Follow us on Facebook, like us, and there'll be live feeds, and hopefully everything we can get out and social, we will.
Thank you. Thanks so much, everyone, for sticking around in the rain. We have